He had no money, no degree, no powerful connections, just a broken workshop and an obsession with perfection. But what started with one flawed piece of glass turned into a global empire worth billions. This is the story of the man who made the world sparkle. Long before red carpets glittered under camera flashes, before couture gowns shimmered in Paris salons, and before the name Swarovski became synonymous with precision, glamour, and light itself, there was only a young craftsman standing in a dim bohemian workshop, staring at glass. He was not yet a legend, not yet the founder of a global luxury empire. He was simply Daniel Swarovski, the son of a glass cutter, surrounded by fragments, dust, and the hypnotic sparkle of unfinished crystal. But even then, one question refused to leave him alone. Why did some crystals blaze with life, while others, cut by equally skilled hands, seemed dull, flat, and lifeless? That question would become an obsession. It would pull him away from tradition, into secrecy, experimentation, and risk. It would force him to challenge a craft that had been passed down for generations. And in time, that obsession would give birth to one of the most successful crystal businesses the world has ever seen. This is the story of the man who began as a glass cutter and built a billion-dollar crystal empire, all because he refused to accept imperfection. Daniel Swarovski was born in 1862 in Bohemia, a region famous for its long and proud tradition of glassmaking. For centuries, Bohemian artisans had produced some of Europe's finest glass, and workshops could be found scattered across the countryside, tucked into villages where entire families dedicated their lives to the craft. Daniel grew up in one of those worlds. His father owned a small glass-cutting business, and from an early age Daniel was surrounded by the sounds, textures, and discipline of crystal work. The workshop was not glamorous. It was dusty, noisy, and demanding. But to Daniel, it was magical. Light bounced off half-finished ornaments, rough shards waited to be transformed, and every movement of a skilled hand seemed to alter the way a stone caught the sun. While other children played outdoors, Daniel lingered inside, fascinated by the relationship between craftsmanship and brilliance. What captivated him most was not just the beauty of the finished object, but the mystery behind it. He noticed that even when two pieces started with the same material and were cut in nearly the same way, they often ended with very different results. One would sparkle intensely, alive with fire and depth, while the other seemed muted, almost lifeless. It was a difference that often came down to tiny variations in pressure, angle, rhythm, or even the mood of the craftsman at the wheel. To many, that was simply the nature of the art. To Daniel, it was a flaw. He respected the tradition deeply, but he could not ignore the fact that beauty in crystal depended too much on human inconsistency. He began to wonder whether brilliance could be made reliable, whether perfection could be repeated, and whether craftsmanship had to remain bound to the limitations of the human hand. That question followed him into adulthood and gained new power in 1883, when he traveled to Vienna for the first electricity exhibition. What he saw there changed the direction of his life. He walked through halls filled with electrically powered machines, devices that moved with a steadiness and consistency no human being could match. Motors ran at fixed speeds. Mechanical tools repeated the same actions over and over without fatigue, distraction, or error. To others, the exhibition was a display of industrial progress. To Daniel, it was a revelation. If electricity could bring such precision to machinery in other industries, why couldn't it transform glass cutting too? Why should crystal brilliance depend on the uncertain movement of a craftsman's wrist when a machine could perhaps deliver perfect uniformity? He returned home with a new vision. He no longer wanted merely to cut crystal better. He wanted to reinvent how crystal was cut altogether. Back in Bohemia, Daniel resumed work in his father's shop, but his mind had already moved elsewhere. He needed a place where he could experiment freely, away from the eyes of traditionalists who would almost certainly see his ideas as a threat. So he retreated to a cramped attic workshop above the family home. It was there, in secrecy, that the revolution began. He had no formal engineering education, no wealthy backers, and no laboratory. What he had was patience, curiosity, and the willingness to fail repeatedly. He gathered parts however he could: scrap metal, gears, belts, small motors, anything he could afford or repurpose. He studied machines by taking them apart, observing how they moved, and teaching himself principles of motion, tension, and grinding through relentless trial and error. The work was difficult and often dangerous. Belts snapped. Grinding wheels cracked. Motors overheated and filled the room with a bitter smell of burning machinery. Experiments collapsed after weeks of effort. Yet Daniel kept going, recording every adjustment, every flaw, every improvement. Slowly, out of noise and frustration, a machine began to take shape. It was crude, loud, and far from elegant, but it had one astonishing advantage. It could cut crystal with a degree of consistency that human hands could not match. In 1892, Daniel patented the world's first electric precision crystal cutting machine. When he first switched it on, it gave off such a shrill metallic scream that neighbors rushed outside, believing something had exploded. But nothing had gone wrong. What they had heard was the sound of a breakthrough. That machine changed everything. For the first time, crystal could be cut with repeatable precision. Facets could be made uniform. Angles could be standardized. Light could be controlled instead of merely hoped for. Daniel had proven that brilliance did not have to be unpredictable. But success also brought a problem. In Bohemia, the old guilds and craft traditions still held immense power, and mechanization threatened their entire way of life. Daniel understood that if he stayed, he would face resistance he might never overcome. So rather than fight a battle with tradition, he chose escape. He packed up his prototype and left Bohemia behind. His search for a better future led him to Wattens, a quiet village in the Austrian Tyrol. At first glance, it seemed an unlikely place to build an empire. It was remote, surrounded by mountains, threaded with glacial streams, and far removed from the great capitals of commerce and fashion. But Daniel did not choose Wattens for status. He chose it for power. The fast-moving alpine waters offered abundant hydroelectric potential, and in an era when reliable electricity was still rare, that mattered more than prestige. In 1895, Daniel relocated his family and his machinery there, joining forces with Armand Kosman and Franz Weiss. Together they founded Swarovski and Company, the company that would eventually become a global symbol of luxury. But Daniel's vision extended beyond the cutting machine itself. Precision in cutting was only part of the equation. The raw crystal also had to be exceptional. If the material lacked clarity, even the finest cut would fail to produce the brilliance he imagined. So he turned his attention to the chemistry of crystal production, experimenting with the composition of glass itself. He worked with mixtures of silica, potash, and lead oxide, refining the formula until he produced a crystal of remarkable purity and light refraction. The exact recipe was guarded with extreme secrecy, and the company would preserve that secrecy for generations. Combined with his cutting technology, the result was extraordinary. Swarovski crystals did not merely sparkle. They interacted with light in a precise, engineered way. Their brilliance became dependable, repeatable, and unmistakable. The effect on the market was immediate. Designers, jewelers, and artisans quickly recognized that this was something new. Until then, crystal had always involved an element of uncertainty. Quality varied from piece to piece. But Swarovski offered consistency. Stones could be ordered in identical sizes, identical cuts, and identical levels of brilliance. That changed the possibilities of design. Fashion houses in Paris and Vienna began requesting samples. Jewelers incorporated the crystals into brooches, necklaces, and tiaras. Theater designers saw that these stones glowed magnificently under stage lighting. For the first time, crystal was no longer just a decorative accent. It became a deliberate design tool. As the 20th century began, fashion was evolving rapidly, with designers exploring new ways to bring movement, texture, and brilliance into their creations. Swarovski crystals arrived at the perfect moment, offering something no other material could: lightweight elegance combined with unmatched sparkle. Their true advantage, however, was consistency. Every crystal was identical, allowing designers to create precise patterns that could be replicated flawlessly. This reliability made Swarovski indispensable to haute couture, quickly spreading from Austria into Paris salons, royal courts, and grand theaters. With the rise of cinema, Swarovski's influence grew even stronger. Hollywood embraced the crystals for their ability to glow under intense lighting, turning costumes into radiant masterpieces. They adorned stars like Marilyn Monroe and Audrey Hepburn, becoming symbols of glamour. Despite challenges during World War I and World War II, the company adapted and survived. In the post-war era, Swarovski expanded into jewelry, lighting, and retail, transforming into a global luxury brand. Collaborations with designers like Christian Dior help cement its place in both high fashion and everyday luxury. Top of form. If you love stories of struggle, vision, and empire building, hit subscribe and join us for the next one. Bottom of form.